And the Senate's about to gavel in, so we're going to leave our Columbus Day Book TV programs now, take you live to the Senate for debate on the shutdown and the debt ceiling continuing today. Judicial nominations scheduled for 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and votes on those nominations at 5:30.
Let us pray. Eternal Father, hear the prayers of all your people everywhere, great and small alike, rich and poor together. May all people called by your name humble themselves and pray, seeking your face and turning from evil. Lord, you have promised that you will hear the prayers of those who fervently seek you, forgiving our sins and healing our nation. Inspire our lawmakers who believe in you to also pray. May their intercession bring them a tallness of stature that will enable them to see above the walls of partisan division in order to secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. We pray in your holy name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., October 14, 2013. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Christopher Murphy, a senator from the state of Connecticut, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I move to proceed to count number 211.
The clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 211, S-1569, a bill to ensure the complete and timely payment of the obligations of the United States government until December 31st, 2014.
Mr. President, at 5 o'clock today, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the nomination of Andrea Wood to be a United States District Judge in Illinois and the nomination of Madeline Hughes to be a United States District Judge in Alabama. 5:30, there will be a roll call vote on confirmation of the Haikala nomination. The Wood nomination is expected to be confirmed in another way. Mr. President, constructive good faith negotiations continue between the Republican leader and me. I'm very optimistic that we will reach an agreement that's reasonable in nature this week to reopen the government, pay the nation's bills, and begin long-term negotiations to put our country on sound fiscal footing. I deeply appreciate my friend, the minority leader, for his diligent efforts to come to an agreement. The Republican leader and I will keep members informed as negotiations continue.
Mr. President.
Republican Leader.
Let me just echo the remarks of my good friend, the Majority Leader. We've had an opportunity over the last couple of days to have some very constructive exchanges of views about how to move forward. Those discussions continue, and I share his optimism that we're going to get a result that will be acceptable to both sides.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
And in a quorum call here on the floor of the Senate, leaders of the Senate first to speak. And a report from Alexander Bolton, reporting for The Hill, says Majority Leader Harry Reid says he hopes to complete a fiscal deal ahead of the White House meeting that's scheduled for 3 o'clock Eastern Time today. That'll be in about 50 minutes. And that the Majority Leader hopes to have a deal to end the shutdown and raise the debt ceiling by the time that the Senate leaders go to the White House. And leaders from the House will be at that meeting as well. While we're in a quorum call here on the floor of the Senate, I want to go ahead and show you one of the segments from this morning's Washington Journal. This has to do with the options that the Treasury Department has in meeting.
I may do so.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, we now find ourselves amazingly in day 14 of a government shutdown. A shutdown that was brought to us by the Republicans in the House. They are sitting on a bill that we sent them to open up the government, and they refuse to take it up. Now, you served over there, I've served over there, and we always had an opportunity to use the rules in some way to get a vote on a bill that was passed by the Senate, but the House, not wanting to have such a vote, have made it pretty much impossible for our colleagues over there, Democrats and moderate Republicans, to actually vote on keeping this government open. Now, I listened very carefully to Majority Leader Reid and Minority Leader McConnell, and I have hopes, as I expressed them yesterday, that we will be able to reach an agreement both on the shutdown and on the debt ceiling. But the fact that we are struggling, the fact that people all over the world are looking at us like we're some kind of dysfunctional country, the fact that we have about 1 million federal employees not getting their checks, not knowing where the next meal is going to come from, the fact that we have more than 2 million workers who work for private sector contractors who don't know where they're going to get paid or how they're going to get paid is something we should all take note of. And we should listen to those who say, this is ridiculous, this is self-inflicted. You know, it just reminds me, you get up and you get out of your house, it's a beautiful day, you're walking down the street, yeah, you got a few problems on your mind, life isn't perfect, but it's pretty optimistic, it's pretty good. And suddenly you take a stone from the ground and bash your head in. Honest to God, that's what they've done, these Republicans. They bashed the head of America on a beautiful day when we're coming out of recession, when we know we have our problems, but we also know we could solve them. It doesn't make sense. And then, as if that isn't enough, they have another stone in their other hand called default. So just as you're beginning maybe to see the light of day, hit yourself again and say to the world, America could actually default on its debts. And the full faith and credit of the United States is in question. Robert C. Byrd, one of the great senators and historians, always tells us to read the Constitution. He told us to read the Constitution. So in my desk I have a couple of copies, and every once in a while I'll look at it. And in that Constitution it's pretty clear, and I'm not quoting verbatim, but it says that the debts of the United States shall not be questioned. Shall not be questioned. Nobody has a right to play with that. And yet we're doing it again because the Republicans are angry. Now, why are they angry? And they are angry. Woo! They're angry. Why are they angry? They're joyless. I believe it's because they lost the presidential election. I believe it's because they didn't take back the Senate. That's what I believe. And therefore they said, well, we don't really want to shut down. And this is a direct quote, pretty much a direct quote from John Boehner. He said, American people don't want to shut down the government, but they also don't want Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. That was his opinion. That's not the truth. The American people don't want to see us shut down the government and threaten default because of a bill that passed almost 4 years ago, a bill that was upheld by the Supreme Court, and a law that was heavily debated in the presidential election. And guess what? The person who said, this is Mitt Romney, on day one, I will repeal Obamacare, lost the election. Now, I've been around here a while, and I've served with 5 presidents. I'm a Democrat. I served with 5 presidents, 3 of whom were Republicans. Lord knows I didn't agree with everything the Republican presidents wanted, and I didn't even agree with everything the Democratic presidents wanted. And I fought hard, and I got annoyed, and I made speeches, and I worked in elections, and I have to tell you, I never saw Republicans or Democrats until today be willing to default, be willing to default. Newt Gingrich did lead us to a government shutdown in the 90s. But we haven't had one since because it was so painful and awful. So I know that the grown-ups are now trying to resolve this. I know that our leaders are going to go to the White House, and hopefully they will come to an agreement. But the fact that it would take us this long, 3 days before a default, and the 14th day of a shutdown is unbelievable. You know, if you're hired by a school district, you're a teacher, you know the rules when you get the job. And you know that school starts at 9 a.m. and you get dismiss the kids at 3 and you show up. You show up. If a teacher says, you know, I don't like the start time, I'm coming 2 hours later, bye, you can't have this job because you knew that was your job. Got to show up. Well, the equivalent of that is our keeping the doors of government open to the people we represent, not slammed shut in their face. That's what we have to do when we show up here. Keep the government going. Do we have disagreements across party aisle and even within parties? Of course we do. But we have a procedure to deal with that. It's called legislating. Legislating. That's what we do when we have disagreements. It's called legislating. And we do that on the floor of the House, the floor of the Senate. There is something called debate. You debate the issues. You battle it out. You have a vote. You pass a bill. The other chamber does the same. You go to a conference committee. The House and the Senate. You argue out the differences. You send that bill to the president, whoever he or she may be. That president either signs the bill or vetoes it, and if he or she signs it, it's a law. If he or she vetoes it, you have an override. I've been involved in those. And once a bill becomes a law, it's the law. It's the law. And you carry it out. You don't decide what laws you want to enforce and what laws you don't. That's not the right way. Our founders said we're a government of laws, not men. You carry out the law. If you don't like the law, try to change it. Now, the Republicans didn't like the Affordable Care Act, which, by the way, is signing up thousands of people a day as we stand here. In my home state, it's signed up right by now tens of thousands. And we've had about, by now, 750,000 at least unique visitors to our site. In Kentucky, they're signing up 1,000 a day. Unbelievable. Never expected. This is the law that caused the government shutdown. The Republicans stamped their feet. They didn't like it. They didn't care that there was an election about it. None of that. But they didn't like it. They're going to shut down the government. Now you don't even hear them talking about it. Now they're talking about wanting to cut Medicaid and Social Security and Medicare. That's their new thing they want to do. Paul Ryan. Well, let's just forget this one. I guess we can't do anything about it, but let's now cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. President, we have a process. We have to get to conference with the House on the Budget Committee. We have a strong chairman, Chairman Patty Murray. She asked, I believe it's now 21 times to take our budget here to conference. Ted Cruz and his friends here have objected. And then they have the nerve to say, we won't negotiate, we want to negotiate in a conference committee. That's why you have a conference committee. They've stopped it. And the House has decided now, well, the Affordable Care Act, I guess it's too late. We can't do anything about it. Then why don't they open up the government? They shut it down because of the Affordable Care Act. They now admit they can't do anything about it. It has a steady stream of funding. It's beginning to work. People are going to think, why do you want to take away the right that I have now, having a pre-existing condition to get health care? Why do you want to stop my child, who can now stay on my health care till he's 26? Why do you want to take away benefits like free trips to the doctor to get immunizations and birth control and health care? They tried to stop women's health care. They gave that up. They tried to stop us from getting cancer screenings, and we said, just forget it. So they're all over the place. Listen, I've lived long enough to know when I see people who are joyless, unhappy, and angry. And that doesn't make for a good, optimistic country. They have the privilege of being here, even if they are only controlling one branch of the three houses, the White House, the Senate, Democrats, the House, Republicans. They have a privilege, and they have a lot of leverage. But the way they're behaving is unacceptable. As I said, it's a self-inflicted wound. I never question the fact that Republicans, Democrats, and independents love this country. Love this country. I never question it. But I have to say, when you start acting like you're committing domestic abuse, you've got a problem. I love you, dear, but, you know, I'm shutting down your entire government. I love you, dear, but I'm going to default and you're going to be weak. Something is dreadfully wrong. So we have about 1 million, and I see my colleague from Maryland here, and so I know he has a state, Maryland, that is suffering mightily from this shutdown. He and I both have a lot of federal employees, but the size of our states are different. And as a percentage of the workforce, Maryland and Virginia are really suffering. In California, we have tens of thousands of workers furloughed, not getting their pay, and a lot of contractors. I say to my friend from Maryland, I was trying to figure out how many contractor employees are also impacted. And even if you say take away military contractors, because some of them are getting paid and some of them aren't, but if you take that all out of the equation, you still have more than 2 million workers in the private sector who are working for federal contractors. I ask unanimous consent to place in the record an article from the Baltimore Sun.
Without objection.
This story says, the shutdown's forgotten victims, government contractors. And I'm glad my friend is on the floor, because this was written today, this morning. In a city where government contracts make up a multi-billion-dollar industry, it's surprising that, with the exception of a couple of articles that received moderate attention, the mainstream media has largely ignored the impact of the shutdown on federal contractors. No, I really wanted to bring this to the attention of my colleagues. Would my friend like me to yield to him for?
If my colleague would yield.
Yes.
Let me say to my friend from California, Senator Boxer, that you're absolutely right. We've heard from a lot of contractors who employ individuals for the federal government, from large contractors such as Lockheed to smaller companies that employ 30, 40, 50 employees. The range is around 20 to 25% of their workforce have been laid off. Now, these workers, there's no assurance whatsoever that they'll ever get paid.
That's right.
And there's some contractors who don't know whether they're going to survive. It's that serious. So the private sector direct employment loss as a result of the shutdown is growing, and it's growing every day. And it's having an incredible impact throughout the country, in every state. You mentioned Maryland, which I have the honor of representing with Senator Mikulski. 10% of our workforce works directly for the federal government. And as you know, the overwhelming majority of that number have been put on furlough. We've estimated that number to be in excess of 125,000 in our state of Maryland. You add that with the private contractors who are laying off workers as a result of the shutdown. And then let me just give you one more example. Last week I stopped by a restaurant right off the Baltimore Beltway. I know the owner. I stopped by basically to get a sandwich. And I asked him how things were going. He said, terrible. He says, about half my customers are not here because they're federal employees that would normally come in during the workday. They're not coming in. You know the margins here are very small for these businesses to be able to remain open. So the direct impact on federal workers, the direct impact on those who have contract work with the federal government, the impact on our economy, it's in every state of the country, but it's particularly in the state I represent, it's been devastating. One more number I want to give you, if I might, and that is the metro system depends upon the federal workforce here. Now, they need a fare box revenue in order to keep the system operating in a modern way, in full capacity, safety issues, et cetera. Their ridership's down 23%. Their revenues are down 23%. What's the metro going to do? So the impact of this shutdown has had incredibly damaging impact on our economy, on families, so many federal workers. As you pointed out, we have a lot of two parents, two husband and wife, both working for the federal government, both on furlough. So many federal workers live paycheck to paycheck. And they're now recognizing that that paycheck's not going to be the full paycheck. It might not be any paycheck. How are they supposed to pay their bills? I talked to one of my constituents in Maryland who works for a federal agency. He and his wife have both been furloughed. He just recently bought a home. He has a mortgage payment to make. The mortgage company is going to say, you know, well, I'm sorry, government shut down, don't pay your mortgage. He's got to pay his mortgage. How's he going to be able to do that? So, you know, we've hurt people. This shutdown, which should never have happened, has had a huge impact on our economy, and the tragedy, as you know, it's also hurt the taxpayers. It's a waste of money. Over $2 billion have already been wasted as a result of this shutdown. So I thank my colleague for allowing me just to interject, just to underscore the point that you have made. You've been on the floor just about every day, and I admire very much what you've been saying, because you're absolutely right. The damage is clear. We never should have shut down government. We should pay our bills. And it's difficult to understand the Republicans' original position that they wanted to negotiate the end of Obamacare on a bill that just keeps the lights on in government. And now we're talking about paying our bills, and they're talking again about dealing with some policy issues. And if we're going to get into that discussion, which we shouldn't, let's turn the lights on, let's open government, let's pay our bills, and then sit down and negotiate. That's what we need to do. We have some major issues that we need to deal with, including how we're going to grow our economy, how we're going to create jobs, how we're going to have a modern transportation infrastructure. You chair of the Environment and Public Works Committee, you fought so hard for a multi-year reauthorization of our surface transportation so we have modern roads well-maintained, modern transit systems. Chairman Boxer, we have 3 major transit initiatives in Maryland that need to move forward. We have to have funding for that. That's how our economy will grow. So, yes, I look forward to sitting down with my Republican colleagues to negotiate a budget for next year, but first, open government and pay the bills.
I still appreciate my friend through the chair interjecting his thoughts here, because I have listened to him and to Senator Mikulski throughout this ordeal. And Senator's right. I have been on the floor quite a lot. And the reason is clear. We need to make a record so that this never, ever, ever, ever happens again. There's a reason we hadn't had a shutdown since the last one, when Newt Gingrich and the Republicans brought it to us in the 90s. Because it was horrible. They got hurt by it. We begged them not to go down this road. They went down the road. And why? Because they didn't like the fact that there's an Affordable Care Act. They didn't like it. So they stamped their foot and said, we're shutting down the government because we don't like it. We begged them. We said, that's not going to help your poor. This Affordable Care Act, 85% of the funds don't come from appropriated funds. They come from a separate stream of funding, and the bill and the law is going forward. They wouldn't listen. And now they've changed their tune and decided it's about cutting Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid. That's their new thing. And my friend is right. It would be so easy to end this. Open the government, pay our bills, get to the budget negotiations where we will have Senator Murray, Senator Sessions, Paul Ryan, and his counterpart begin regular order. I wanted to continue about this contractor employee, because what he said is so moving. Or actually, I think it's a she. She says, as a technical writer and communications specialist for a small company, my fate was sealed long before early media reports warned of many more impending furloughs. When you are sent home from work for over a week, you begin to notice certain things around you that could cause you to lose heart. In my own neighborhood, and Senator Cardin, she's talking about your city of Baltimore. In my own neighborhood, this contractor writes, I've noticed several cars parked in their driveways, cars that never leave in the mornings for work and never leave in the evening for a night on the town. The metro parking garages are empty. You, Senator, alluded to that. People's morale is diminishing as cabin fever sets in on all sides. And as rumors of the shutdown continue, continuing until the 17th spread like wildfire in a windstorm, my colleagues and I seem to have exhausted every resource. And she talks about, like everyone else, there are many of us who owe student loans, and we're expected to pay rent. We have to pay for utilities, credit card bills, dog food, and other necessities like food and clothing. To make matters worse, my husband and I, and this is interesting, had set aside money for a little vacation. That money is now going toward bills. So what does it mean? An article in the Post recently reported the shutdown could amount to a loss of $200 million a day for local businesses throughout the city. $200 million a day for local businesses throughout your city of Baltimore. And she says contractors, especially those who work for small businesses, have been hit hard by this shutdown. And just explains how they may never be made whole. So day 14 of a shutdown.
Can I ask my colleague if she
Yes,
yield
I'll
one
be
more
happy to yield through the chair.
I thank the chair, and I thank Senator Boxer. And you point out the hardship of people not getting a paycheck. Senator Boxer points it out very clearly. Some of these people are the same people who have just been furloughed as a result of sequestration. So they already had smaller paychecks because of sequestration. And let me just remind my colleagues, sequestration was put in 2 years ago as a placeholder. I don't know of a single senator who wanted to see sequestration take effect. It was a placeholder to get to a budget negotiations. So what did we do? We passed a budget. We passed a budget almost 7 months ago. And we said, let's negotiate. We knew it's not going to be our budget. We know we have to negotiate with the House to get a budget to get rid of sequestration. Now, I mention that because, once again, we have a very simple request today, and that is open government and pay our bills and sit down and negotiate. It's pretty simple. We haven't brought forward our policy objectives in this, which is to have a budget that makes sense for this country, that allows the growth of employment, that invests in not only roads, bridges, but energy and research and education, so that we can build a competitive economy for the 21st century. We want a budget that is balanced between how we reduce spending, not just on what we call our discretionary spending accounts, but also as we look at our entitlement spending. Yes, we want to see our health care system more efficient. We want to work to make it a more efficient health care system. We already started that with the passage of the Affordable Care Act. Now we want to implement that. That'll bring about some additional savings. And we believe that we should pay our bills. We should have the revenue necessary. And our revenue code is full of inequities that hemorrhage revenue. My colleague from California is well aware of the fact that in our tax code, I serve on the Senate Finance Committee, and I think our colleagues understand that we're now spending more money in our tax code than we do in appropriation bills. We spend more money in the tax code. That's tax breaks that some people get, not everyone gets. We certainly can review those tax expenditures and close those that are inefficient, which will not only provide more equity in our tax code, but provide more revenue to pay our bills and reduce our deficit. It's that type of negotiations that we want to get into. But you can't do that when the Republicans have put a gun to the head of the U.S. economy. That's what they've done by shutting government and by threatening not to pay their bills. So we say very simply, put down the gun, let's negotiate these issues. And you're absolutely right about the private contractor issue. I mean, that's something that I don't think everyone, when you look at the 800,000 federal workers that have been furloughed, that doesn't include the private contractors, which are clearly going to be an additional hundreds of thousands that are not working today. Yes, it's a huge drain on our economy, and there's no reason for this. So for all those reasons, what we say very clearly, on day 14 of this shutdown, let us open government, let us pay our bills, and yes, let's develop a sensible way to negotiate our budget. Let's not try to threaten the American people and then try to pass an extreme agenda as a result of that. I thank through the chair, I thank Senator Boxer for yielding.
And through the chair, I thank my friend. You know, this contractor issue is a sleeper issue in a way, as this woman writes in the Baltimore Sun. Because if you look at the numbers, Senator, you may see more contractor employees affected than federal employees. Because even if you take, there's millions of them, and even if you take away, if you look at the statistics, the millions who work for the military and assume they're getting paid, will assume they're getting paid, it still leaves more than 2 million who are contractors to other arms of the government, like Homeland Security or the Border Patrol or you name it. And it's a sleeper issue. And this woman who is so articulate, I hope Clarissa Olivares knows that we're taking her words to heart, putting her words in the record. She's explaining what it feels like to be scared. And for what? For nothing. Because they didn't like the Affordable Care Act that they're not going to change. They tried to repeal it 43 times. Open the government. They're so afraid they'll lose the vote. They're not even allowing a vote over there. Now, they're coming back, my friends in the House, shortly. By the way, imagine Speaker Boehner said, go home over the weekend while all this is pending. They weren't even in session. It's outrageous. I'm going to conclude in about 5 minutes by talking about some of the other impacts of this shutdown. 93% of the employees at the EPA have been furloughed. Now, what do? They make sure the air we breathe is safe, the water we drink is safe, the rivers we swim in are safe. They make sure that Superfund sites are being cleaned up, those toxic brews in there, including things like benzene and arsenic and every other bad thing you can imagine. In my state, there's not one single EPA inspector on the ground. I have established that. And that's the same in many others. 505 Superfund sites were being cleaned up, cleanup suspended. Many children live near those sites. There are many schools near those sites. There are many homes near those sites. They are toxic waste dumps. No cleanup. Now we find out that 92% of workers at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission have been furloughed. What is their job? It was created, and I quote, to ensure the safe use of radioactive materials. So I say to every senator that has a nuclear power plant in their state, make a little prayer. If something bad happens, we have to somehow nab all those workers and get them back on the job in time. Earth to my Republican friends, have you ever heard the word Fukushima? Know what I'm talking about here? Wake up. What are you doing to the American people? You don't like a bill, so you shut down the government. You take all of the watchdogs off the job so people could start dumping waste into the waterways, into the air. We even have a circumstance in California where pesticides are being imported from other countries. The EPA has to inspect those at the site and make sure they're safe. Well, there's no inspectors, I just told you that. So they're sitting in a warehouse, and our farmers are starting to say, where are these pesticides? We need them. This shutdown is mindless. The Army Corps of Engineers manages 12 million acres of public lands, recreation areas that host 370 million visits annually. These recreation areas support local businesses like resorts, marinas, outfitters, grocery stores, gas stations, hotels. Shut down. Last week, the Corps closed Lake Mendocino, which is located north of San Francisco. Lake Mendocino hosts 500,000 visitors annually, and visitors spend $12 million at businesses within 30 miles of the lake, supporting 106 jobs and $2.8 million in income. Mr. President, those small businesses can't go on like this. They can't go on like this. 561 national wildlife refuges are closed because of the shutdown. I say to my friend, Senator Cardin and I, we're very close friends because we work together daily on these issues. He's the chairman of the committee that oversees water quality, these wildlife refuges. And in many parts of the country, hunting season is in full swing. And I say to my friend from Oregon, I just found out, and he probably knows this, on the California-Oregon border, hunters and tourists usually head to Klamath Basin National Wildlife Refuge for the opening of hunting season, but they've been denied access, which means local businesses are losing much-needed revenues. So the impact of this is felt with the direct hit to federal employees, contractor employees, local businesses. Everyone is suffering. That's why we had a letter I put in the record yesterday or the day before, signed by the Chamber of Commerce, the AFL-CIO, and the nonprofit sector. It is so rare, I say to my friends, that you see those three groups coming together. They are demanding that we open up the government. They are demanding a clean debt ceiling. so we can pay our bills. They are demanding it. And they represent the broadest base part of America. Who is benefiting from this other than people who have a very dark side? That's all I could say. You'd have to have a really dark side. Now I have a situation where we have just two examples of the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board. We had a horrible crash in November, Asiana Airlines, Flight 214. We don't know exactly why it happened. The NTSB has been forced to postpone its hearing. And in these investigations, I say to my friends, you find out things that help you avoid disaster in the future. 3 weeks ago in Santa Monica, a little airport, a crash killing 4 people. Investigation materials shoved into a vault. And we don't know why it happened. And if we knew why it happened, we could save lives. I remember when I first came to Congress a very long time ago and I served in the House, there was a terrible crash and they found out it was a very small bolt or a screw that was responsible for the problems, and they grounded every aircraft that had that faulty part and fixed it. That's why these investigations are critical, not only to answer to the loved ones what happened, but to make improvements. It's all shut down. The Consumer Product Safety Commission. In San Diego last week, a 2-year-old, Annette Estrada, was killed when she was crushed by a falling TV. Normally, the Consumer Product Safety Commission investigates this heartbreaking incident. They find out what was the problem. They demand it be fixed. Who knows who the next child is going to be? That's why we have a government of, by, and for the people to make life better for the American people. The government is shut down. Open it up. Let the people in. It's easy to do. Speaker Boehner has a bill. Let them vote over there. Open up the government now. Open up the government now. People are in danger. There's no winners in a shutdown. It's devastating for workers. It's devastating for small businesses. It's devastating for contractors. It's devastating to our economy, which is just coming out of the worst recession since the Great Depression. What are they thinking over there? Then they send these little mini bills. Oh, open up this little agency and open up that little agency. I call that government by press release. They get, the heat is on them, so they pass a little mini bill. Since when does one political party decide which of our communities survive, which ones thrive, which ones die, which people live, which people die, which child is healthy and which child isn't healthy? I have a community in California, kids are suffering nosebleeds, they're sick. It turns out they're very close to an industrial site. I called EPA, they were going to rush over there and figure it out and stop the pain. They can't go. I don't see a bill over there to open the EPA. They'll never send us that.
Through the chair, I'd ask my colleague.
Happy to yield.
You're absolutely right. Again, the responsibility of your chairmanship of the Environment and Public Works Committee, just how critically important the Environmental Protection Agency is to protecting public health, protecting our environment. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission, its importance to protect the public safety. You're absolutely right. But I want to just give you another dynamic here, and that's jobs. The fact that the EPA is not at full force is hurting economic growth. I'll just give you one example. Harbor Point in downtown Baltimore, which is a RCRA site, which means that it was an environmental cleanup site that has a court order on its development requiring the EPA to sign off to make sure that the environmental issues are being protected in its development. Now, everything is fairly well understood here, and it's gone through a long process. We now are at the point where we're ready to develop this prime spot. It is the most iconic spot in downtown Baltimore. It's going to help our city grow. Our city needs economic growth, and it's on hold. Why? Because EPA does not have its people in the office to be able to review this application in a timely way. That's just an example. Environmental Protection Agency, critically important for public health, critically important for our environment, but also for economic growth. I'll give you another example. The Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco Tax. Well, they're not at full complement either. Now, we have microbreweries in Maryland that are doing very well. Every time they add a new product, they have to get approval from the alcohol and tobacco tax people, their new labels. That's on hold. Their economic growth is on hold. I could give you many more examples. You mentioned our refuge. Well, Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge, located on the eastern shore of Maryland, one of the most beautiful spots in the world. This is hunting season. The eastern shore of Maryland depends upon the hunting season for its economy. I can't tell you how many hotel operators and restaurants and shop owners depend upon the fall season being in full force with the hunting season, and now we put a real damper, not just the weather we had over the past weekend, but the fact that government was closed. Actually, it was good weather for hunting. Put a real damper on that economy. They lost that. They're not going to be able to recover it. I mean, that's lost. And as you point out, our request is pretty simple, Mr. President. Our request is pretty simple, and that is open government, pay our bills, and let's sit down and negotiate. And the point that I hope everyone understands, the funding level that we sent over to the House of Representatives is the Republican funding level. We didn't negotiate that number. That's the current FY13 number. We didn't negotiate between that number and our budget number that this body passed. We gave up on that, saying, look, it's more important to keep government open. So we've already negotiated. If I just bear for one more minute. I've used this before. Since you've given the Sun papers, the Baltimore Sun, a lot of credit here today, let me just quote from their editorial, because I think this is important to point out. I've read it before on the floor.
Take your time.
Passing, this is a quote from the Sun papers editorial, passing a clean continuing resolution keeping government fully operating at funding levels the GOP has already endorsed is no compromise. It's the status quo. Raising the debt ceiling isn't a concession either. It allows the nation to pay its bills. Congress has already incurred and prevents the possibility of a government default, which would hurt the economy, raise borrowing costs, increase the federal deficit. So when Speaker Boehner lashes out at President Obama for failing to negotiate, one has to ask, what is this thing he describes as negotiations? House Republicans are not merely leveraging their political position, as some dryly claim. They are threatening to do grievous harm to the global economy and the American public. The gun isn't raised to President Obama or the Senate. The Democrats have no particular stake in passing a continuing resolution or raising the debt ceiling other than keeping public order and doing what a reasonable person expects Congress to do. No, the gun is raised at the nation as a whole. That's why descriptions like ransom and hostage are not mere hyperboles. They are as close as the English language gets to accurately describing the GOP strategy. Mr. President, I hope we're close. That's the end of the quote. I hope we're close to reaching an agreement and the government will open. It should never have closed. Damage, a lot of harm's already been done. We're on a motion to proceed to the debt ceiling. If we were not to pay our bills, that will cause irreparable harm, not just to our economy, but to the world economy. That's something we should not be playing around with as to waiting to the last possible minute. I would really urge my colleagues to put the interests of this country first. This is a serious matter that affects our economy, America's future, and the global economy. You know, if we turn the global economy into a further economic disorder, it's going to have a major impact on the United States, and it will be our fault. So I would just urge my colleagues to immediately cease this strategy of threatening our economy, open government, pay our bills, and let's sit down and negotiate as we should a budget agreement which will not be what the Democrats want or the Republicans want, but it will be a compromise as it should be, between the parties. That we owe to the American people. And through the chair, I want to thank Senator Boxer again for underscoring these points and pointing out the impact, just the wide impact this has on all parts of our country. We've got to end it. I hope we can end it tonight.
Mr. President, again, thank you through the chair for allowing this interlude. And I do want to say to my friend, I think it's been very helpful that he and I have been in this conversation because we share the view that these two self-inflicted wounds are outrageous. And we want to make sure that in the congressional record it is very clear. It is very clear of the pain and the suffering and the concern and the insecurities that this dual wound, the potential of a default and an actual government shutdown, are causing. Because I pray that we are never facing this again. You know, I'm very mindful of the words I use here on the floor, so I'm not going to say what I think about this exactly the way I would talking to my family. But there's no reason for it. It makes no sense. It makes no sense to do this to a country you say you love. Why hurt the country you say you love? Why make the country you say you love look like a laughingstock? Why make a president who was going to go to Asia to pitch our economy and investments in our nation, why make him cancel a trip and have China stand up there and say, well, you can see America just doesn't have it together? If you love your country, you don't do that. Some of the comments over there are unbelievable. One of the Republican House members said, I've never seen us so happy. She's happy? She's happy that millions of people don't know where the next check is coming? She's happy? She's happy that plane crashes can't be investigated? She's happy that Superfund sites can't be cleaned up? She's happy that veterans are scared? She's happy that 65-year-olds or 62-year-olds who were new to Social Security can't get it on time? She's happy? She has to look into her heart. That whole party has to look into its heart. You know, every once in a while, you can see into someone's soul. And you know it when it's happened to you. I got in a conversation with one colleague, shall remain nameless. I was so excited. I came home from California and I saw that tens of thousands of my people are signing up for health insurance that never had it before. And I could tell you the stories. They're beautiful. People with pre-existing conditions, people who had lifetime caps, people who were scared, little kids whose parents finally were able to save their lives. There's one incredible woman who wrote an op-piece in the Washington Post about this. And you know what he said? He said, and I told him, I said, I went to a sign-up place and it was exciting. And so many people were signing up. And this was in the Hispanic communities and they had a smile on their face. And he said, well, I was happy to read in one of your papers that 2 people had their premiums doubled. And I stopped and I said, you were happy? That made you happy? Look into your soul, I said. Why are people happy over there? How do you say, I love my country, but I don't care if my country defaults? I want to show you what President Ronald Reagan said about defaulting, not paying our bills. President Ronald Reagan, the beloved president of the Republicans and many Democrats. He came from my state. One of the most popular presidents in the history of our country. We've got airports named after him. We've got buildings named after him. Why don't we see what he said about default? And just know, when he was president, Republicans and Democrats raised the debt ceiling no less than 18 times, I say to my friends. 18 times we raised the debt ceiling because, yeah, we had a debt from prior bills, and Ronald Reagan said, send me a debt ceiling increase. Look what he says. He said, the full consequences of a default, or even the serious prospect of a default by the United States, are impossible to predict and awesome to contemplate. Denigration of the full faith and credit of the United States would have substantial effects on the domestic financial markets and the value of the dollar. Ronald Reagan, 1983, and that's when our economy was much smaller than it is today. So how does the party of Ronald Reagan now get us to this place where in 3 days we're about to default? I didn't hear one word out of them when they decided to put 2 wars on a credit card and a huge tax break to billionaires on the credit card and a big medical prescription drug benefit on the credit card. Not one word out of them. Oh, vote, 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 vote. And what happened? We had a surplus under Bill Clinton. We had a huge increase in the deficits under George W. Bush. And by the way, President Obama got handed an enormous deficit, which he has cut in half. So all this talk about how the Republicans are the party of fiscal responsibility bears scrutiny. There wasn't one Republican that voted for the budget, I say to my colleagues, that Bill Clinton wanted us to vote for. We did it all with Democratic votes. And then we got not only a balanced budget, but a surplus and tens of millions of new jobs. George Bush came in, 2 wars on the credit card, prescription drug benefit on the credit card, tax breaks to billionaires on the credit card, and the debt was off and running. But not one Republican said don't pass a debt ceiling. Not one Republican said don't default. Oh, what changed? Could it be they don't like this president? You think that has something to do with it? I'll let people decide that. So we now know what Ronald Reagan said. He said, in other words, we need to pay our bills. We need to avoid default. There isn't one respected economist who doesn't agree with what Ronald Reagan said in 1983. The cost to taxpayers of default is enormous. Billions upon billions of dollars, even the thought of it. We're still paying off what it cost us the last time. Experts warn us against default. James Gorman, CEO Morgan Stanley, it ought to be banned as a weapon. It should be, this is Warren Buffett. It, meaning a default, ought to be banned as a weapon. It should be like nuclear bombs, too horrible to use. Warren Buffett. He knows a thing or two about this economy. Mark Zandi, who advised John McCain in his presidential run, breaching the limit would be an economic disaster. You know, what would happen to average folks? Mortgage rates could go sky high. Small business, big business couldn't expand. We go into a recession, and they're happy over there about the prospect. Look into their souls. President of the World Bank, Jim Kim, please consider politics beyond the Beltway, politics beyond your districts. This is not a theoretical impact, it's very real. And again, Mark Zandi, the dark scenario is so dark I can't imagine it. That's what he said. So we pray now as our leadership goes over to the White House, and they're probably right there now meeting with the president, that they come out of that meeting with a plan. A plan to pay our bills, a plan to reopen government, and a plan to negotiate on anything Republicans and Democrats want to negotiate on. I pray so that this works out. But until it does, I'm going to be here every day making the record for future senators and for the history books that this kind of a weapon, shutting down the government and threatening default, that those kinds of weapons should be banned. It's our job to pay the bills. It's our job to keep the government open, just like it's a pilot's job to fly the plane. He's got to show up and fly it. We've got to show up, pay the bills, keep the government open, and then negotiate our differences. Thank you so much, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.